life. Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and love. Good morning, sun. Good morning, sun.
And hello. Cheers. Drink some coffee. So today I have a couple of small wins. I will take wins whenever I can because if you've worked with software and computers for long, you know that there are some problems that are just I'm sure there's an answer or an explanation as to why the problem is occurring, but the number of possible reasons for them to occur and the difficulty of finding that and the time and effort required, sometimes it's just maddening and kind of bizarre. But occasionally you do get lucky enough to have situations where there are simple fixes. And even if you didn't know what the fix is at first, you found the simple fix with relative ease and hopefully not too much headache. And I celebrate those simple fixes because often those simple fixes are very clear, very easy, and they're reliable. So, sorry for the pool analogies, but they just keep on coming. So my daughter had a friend over this weekend and they wanted to jump in the pool, which is now clean, by the way. But as you can see, it's around 66 Fahrenheit, which is pretty chilly. So I turned on the pool heater to warm up the little spa jacuzzi area, which is easy to warm up. And the pool heater didn't work. Now, I've had this heater for, 7+ years and no issues with it. So I was like, something's not right. And I could smell gas. It didn't turn on, but I could smell the natural gas coming out. I was like, oh gosh, these are expensive, expensive to replace. I don't know how much they are to repair, but I know it's not cheap. You're talking $800 probably to repair. So I was like, oh, I opened up a panel, looked at it. It's just like, I wouldn't know the first thing to do with this. It's built in a way that it's not easily serviceable. You got to really fully disassemble the thing to get to anything. And so I was like, oh, bummer. But I kept searching and the internet is incredible. And there's a couple YouTube videos of DIY homeowners and pool repair people with like giving lectures on these particular pool heaters. Thankfully, it's a common brand. And there's only like 4 things that could be wrong with it. And so I go through all the things. I'm like, I don't know what it is. But eventually I find a video that explains that, talk about bad UI. Instead of showing an error code or error message or whatever about what the problem is, my heater had no error code, which sometimes they do display that. What you have to do is you have to take this thing apart, flip it over, and look at the circuit board behind that button control panel. And the circuit board has LED lights to indicate certain fault codes. Now, why they can't just expose these LEDs on the touch panel that is already there on the other side of this circuit board, how hard would that have been? So anyway, I had to stick my phone camera underneath and take photos to get this snapshot. And there's a little red light in the bottom right corner. I assume that means power, but none of these fault codes highlighted in yellow were lit up. So the lights weren't on. I was like, huh. So all the diagnostic flowcharts I found online said, well, you do X, Y, and Z, and then you go to these lights and see which one is lit. Well, none of them are lit. So I was puzzled, and I thought I checked all the things, the earlier diagnostics in this process, and I thought, okay. And after checking all this stuff 3 times, I literally just stood back. I stepped back 6 feet. And I'm standing there staring at this expensive heater, thinking about the minimum $200 service call. And then some guy, who knows whether he's going to know what he's doing, takes this apart and says, oh, you need this $400 part. We'll give that a try. Maybe that'll fix it. And that'll lead to the $600 part. And pretty soon I've spent the $2,000 to replace the whole thing. So I was not looking forward to this. And then I just stared at the whole mess. Hello, Eric. Yes, this is a pool maintenance therapy session. Come on in. If you've ever owned a pool, you will understand. So I stood there, and after a moment of contemplation, I just looked down. Oops, I hit the wrong button. And what do I see? Now, I've never had a problem with this before, so it wouldn't occur to me to even look at this or notice it. And I thought, oh, that can't be the problem. So I skipped right past it. I assumed that all the things were working right. Well, you might notice something in this picture. If you're familiar with valves, you might notice there's a yellow valve there. That's a gas valve. And I saw that it was slightly off. And so I said, okay, let me twist it clockwise so it's totally horizontal, because maybe my wife bumped it when she was cleaning the pool or something. Well, after standing back and just thinking about it and looking at it and understanding the symptoms and no error codes and oh, when the valve is horizontal, the gas is turned off. It took me 30 minutes to dawn on me. So somehow this valve, which has remained untouched for 8 years, got bumped or whatever. Of course, my wife claims that she didn't touch it naturally. I don't think my kids would touch it. I know what that is, so I would never touch it, but it happened. Sure enough, turn the valve back on, pool heater fires right up. It's one of those you've got to be kidding me, but I didn't have to call anyone. I was super thankful. So that started my weekend of new problems and simple fixes, which I was very grateful for. So that was number one. Next up, what do we have? Well, I have a script that updates BC Container Helper automatically because Freddie will produce new releases, and maybe he mentions it on Twitter, does a blog post, or just pushes it out silently as a fix. I can easily miss that. So I wrote a script a while back, simple PowerShell, that uninstalls BC Container Helper, or it first checks the version. If there's a newer version, it will uninstall the current version, download and install the new version. Really simple, right? It'll then send me an email. So while on the BC Open discussion with Sarov, one of the things he happened to mention when talking about, I forget what the topic was, something about container build issues, he said, make sure you're on the latest version. I was like, oh, great. Well, it turns out that I guess my script hadn't been running, or it was sending notifications to a different email address. So I said, okay, great. Let me run my script to make sure I have the latest version. So it ran, completed successfully, got the confirmation email. I thought, great, I have the latest version. Well, the next day, I got an email with this error. And it says, there was an error building your container. And this is a separate script that I have that creates a new dev container every morning. And it says flush container helper cache is not recognized. And this is just a command before I even attempt to build the container. It just removes all the old files. Thought, well, that's strange. I've never seen this before. And it's like, I don't even know what this is. And so I look at the error log and it's bizarre. It's like calling substring start index cannot be larger than the length of the string. It's like, what? That's pretty low. That's pretty fundamental. Like, how is this happening? So I thought after I upgraded BC Container Helper, this problem was occurring, like something wrong with the latest version, right? Well, then I went back to my BC Container Helper update notifications, and thankfully I email I received these via email. I went back and looked at this. Do you notice anything strange? So before I saw the notification, it said, great, it was done. When I went back, I actually read it. Current version 2.06, latest version 2.07. Fantastic, updating at 2.07. But then notice, update complete, current version is now 2.06. What? I just stared at this like, what is going on? So I went to my Docker server. I checked the version of BC Container Helper. Nothing. It's not installed at all. And I'm thinking, what is going on? So I ran my script again just to see what would happen. Notice this. Now it says current version not installed, updating to 2.07. It sees there's an update. Current version is now not installed. So I still can't explain this, but I ran it a third time. And for whatever reason, this third time it worked. So it's like the install wasn't working and the install wasn't working, or one of those was failing, and for whatever reason I wasn't getting an error. And I'll have to check. I may have the parameter that says like silent errors or suppress errors or warnings or whatever. I may have to turn that off. That might be why I'm not getting the errors in these logs. But for whatever reason, the third time it did run successfully. I don't know why. Maybe it, who knows? But anyway, I ran this 3 times, 2.07 got installed, and everything has worked fine since. So really strange. Never seen it before, but it solved itself with an update. Next up, Git default branch. So I noticed last week when I was doing my Relearning Git series, it finally occurred to me that when I did a local git init, by default, I was getting a default branch, I guess it's called. The standard main branch was called master. And I was like, that's strange. I could have sworn it was main. Well, it turns out that when I created initialized Git repositories in Azure DevOps, it is defaulting to main. And apparently that can be configured and overridden. But now, on my account at least, the default is main. So I was like, okay, that's annoying. Like, I prefer main. It just makes more sense to me. I was never a fan of master. Like, why did they call it that? Because it's not like there's subsidiary branches. So I prefer main just the way I think. So I spent an hour trying to get my Git to default to a branch of main. And there's a great post on here, superuser.com. It says, oh, you just do this. Git config global init default branch main. Okay, I tried that. Didn't work. My Git init would still produce master. So I found out in addition to -- global, there's -- system. It's like, okay, maybe there's something wrong with my machine. So I tried git config system init default branch main. Nope. When I did git init, still master. I then found there's git config local. Tried that. Nope. And the variable was set. I'm able to read the variable and get it up, outputs to me. It says main. Yep. Your init.default branch is definitely main. Checked it 3 times, multiple tests, run as admin, the whole bit, just would not work. Whenever I did a git init, it was always master. Well, once again, I stepped back. I reread this for the 12th time. What is the first sentence on this response? It is, as of Git 2.28, released 27th of July, 2020. You can now use this setting. Well, folks, can you guess what my version is? Let's just say it was not 2.28. I failed to comprehend the value of that first sentence. Go figure, read the instructions. So I downloaded and installed 2.31 this morning, and I noticed the setup window has this new option as part of the setup. Let me see if I can, where am I here? Let's scoot that over. Did that work? Okay. There we go. And so it's kind of weird. It says let Git decide for the initial branch. And so I don't know if that let Git decide will allow you to use the git config init default branch setting. Perhaps, but there is this override feature, override default branch name for new repos, specify the name git init should use for the initial branch. So this essentially allows you to override or force the default. And I don't know if this is better or worse than just using git init, but at least this solved my problem. I'm fine making mine main, so I don't really have to worry about other branches or other teams using a different naming convention. So anyway, simple fix, thankfully. Seems to work fine. I tested it, works great. And now on 2.3.1, and I just did a test and git init, and there is main down there. So that was really cool to see. Okay, so those are my small victories over the last several days. So I will take those as celebratory wins. Okay, moving on. Visual Studio Code, or VS Code, multi-route workspaces. I was intending to work on something else on Friday and realized, well, in order to do that, I should probably set up, or actually my colleague said, well, we better set up a multi-route workspace, right? Because that's how this is done. And first of all, it's a mess as far as I could tell. Who named this? This was clear. Whoever named this should stay out of the branding and naming world. We know that Microsoft is famous for their naming, but multi-route workspaces, come on. Visual Studio just calls them solutions. Within the solutions, you have projects. And if you look at the documentation, the Microsoft documentation for multi-route workspaces, it's like 3 paragraphs down until the word root is mentioned, and it's referring to the root directory of a project. Like, come on, terrible, terrible name. It's like confusing for someone who's new to this, new to Visual Studio. And so Eric says workspace is the generic term for, say, a project, and I'm fine with that. But multi-route workspace, why don't they call it a solution that has, or I don't know. So multi-route workspaces. So if a workspace has multiple projects in it, why isn't it just a workspace? Why is it a multi-route? Isn't a workspace implicitly multi-route? I don't know. So anyway, tried to set this up, and I got it. I followed the instructions. We set it up, but it's like really tedious, and you're having, it feels, this is only the first time I've done it, but it feels tedious and cumbersome to set up manually. It's like a bunch of different steps to get it all working and point things in the right place, and it's very confusing which directory you want things to go, because Visual Studio Code seems to want to save things in a certain place. So I finally figured it out, but I thought, gosh, like if I have to do this regularly, this is going to be annoying. And I was looking for documentation on the AL process, AL version of doing this, because the Visual Studio Code generic documentation is very basic, and it doesn't cover certain things on the AL side. Like maybe you should consider X, Y, and Z. Like here, in this example, my colleague said, well, I believe we can set up a separate folder for our symbols. And so that you have a single folder that serves, hosts all the symbols for your multiple projects, I believe is if I'm interpreting that right. And so we kind of figured this out, but then we're like, okay, well, what's the best way How should we do this in DevOps? Should we have one Git repo for this entire workspace? Should we have different Git repos for the app and test? And like, what's the best practice for this? So it's just more questions. And I figured, okay, well, we can have a DevOps project that has multiple repos, but I think all this can go into one if it's just an app and a test app. And so Eric says, think about a web project that's built on a folder structure on a web server. There's a root folder. AL takes the same approach. There is a root folder, but they call this multi-root, referring to each project, each working folder as the root is my interpretation. So I just think they just could have called it a VS Code solution, right? They use the term workspace, so just call it workspace. So anyway, so we set it up and got it working. I haven't checked this into Git yet, but I think it'll work to have this all in a single repository. And but I had questions, and I found two things. Camille, Sacek, don't know how to pronounce his last name. He actually has a sample GitHub repo where he has set up a Multiroute Workspace project that you can just clone, and kind of has the generic folders, and it's already set up in a workspace. So that's one approach that apparently he used. And then the second thing that someone pointed to me on Twitter is that I think it was Henrik, Waldo has a blog post just discussing this and kind of showing how it's set up. So, but I don't think he went into as much detail, or he didn't cover the questions that I have. So I'm wondering, is there an easier way or simpler way of just doing this? Maybe it is I just have the generic folder structure on my machine and copy it. Kind of like now I just have a generic git ignore and I just copy it. I don't bother trying to recreate it. So I have a feeling there's an easier way to do this. And my colleague said that he's running a couple weird issues when trying to use this multi-route workspace structure. So we're going to look into those and see if we find more questions. And I think I'm going to bug Waldo to see if he can answer those. So I think I'm not alone. Based on the feedback I saw on Twitter, there are at least a couple other people who want to know more about this. So hopefully we can have a guide or some simple step-by-step about the current, whatever the current best practice is for setting this up and getting it to work. So yeah. Anyway, and my use case for this is relatively simple. It'll just be an app and a test app. So I'll create my per tenant extension, and then I'll just want to have a test app for automated testing of that extension, essentially. So I don't anticipate like Waldo, I think, showed a screenshot. He's got like 20 different apps in there, all in a multi-route workspace. So that's the extreme. I just want two as far as I can tell. Anyway, so with that, 2021 release wave 1 is imminent, and aka Business Central 18.0, I believe. And there is a PDF available. I think it's available on MS Docs as well, but the PDF I found is kind of the easiest way, where it's all in one linear document and I'm not having to click 50 different links to jump around in circles. And so this like 400 or 500 page PDF has roughly 80 pages related to Business Central, starts on page like 400 or something like that. And then this is kind of the overview paragraph. Then it tells you by section. And I was asked if like what I was interested in, or if there were things I was excited about. And personally, I don't get too excited about software releases, especially when they come out every 6 months. I know the team works really hard at putting this all together. It's a ton of work for them, and collectively it's a huge amount of work. But when I drill down any one feature, it's like, okay, returning complex data types. Okay, coming from C#, I'm like, well, yeah, that kind of needs to be there. I, I'm not used to not having it, so I can't get too excited about having it all of a sudden. And report extensibility, I think that's cool. Extension validation on upgrade, neat stuff. I just don't get excited about it. That's just me. I'm interested in using them, but I don't know that I'll be cracking open a bottle of champagne quite like the entire Business Central team that's done with all this work. They are celebrating, rightfully so. But I think collectively it's a lot of stuff. Individually, I'm not able to appreciate the individual improvements yet. I'm sure people with more experience who are used to not having some of these features will be very happy having them. I think report extensibility, I can totally see the value of that one. That's great. So I think that'll be a valuable one. So I just went through the PDF, highlighted the ones that I thought were interesting, and I believe Tanya Henderson and I are going to do a session on some of these that we think are interesting, and then I believe New View Strategies is having a mix it up session, I think they call it, where they're going to talk about some of these and get some input on which ones look good. So if you haven't checked it out, you can review these. And I have Docker container with version 18.0. And I noticed as soon as I log in, there's a big banner promoting, it appears to be promoting the setup checklist, which is also new. And I don't know where this, it's not on this screenshot, but there's a new setup checklist. And when you log in, there's a big old colorful banner. So you'll notice that right away. Okay, also related to this, the launch event is April 13th coming up. And you can register for it. Registration is free. It is 8 to 9:30 Pacific, apparently, hour and a half. So I'm not sure how they're doing all their sessions in an hour and a half, unless that's just the opening and then everything else is on demand. Not quite sure, but it just says 8 to 9:30 a.m. Pacific. So anyway, check that out. I know unfortunately, I didn't watch all the videos from last time still, but last time there's a lot of very good information in the sessions, particularly the API one. I wasn't aware of some of the things. They were mentioned in the API video session for the launch event in the fall. So there will be valuable information in these sessions it's probably documented in somewhere in Docs, but it may not be as obvious, or you may miss it somewhere in Docs. So I think these sessions are probably the best place to catch up on what is new. So if you have any questions about Multiroute Workspaces, send them my way. I'm going to collect them. I have several questions. If you have your own, send them to me on Twitter or whoever else on YouTube as a comment to this video, and I'll add them to my list in interrogating Waldo and any other victim who wants to try to answer my question. So with that, have a good day.
Good.